The Duke hid his identity to test her kindness, but he never expected to lose his heart. Welcome, everyone. Tonight I want to share with you a story that begins with deception but ends in a truth so powerful, it changed the fate of an entire duchy. This is a tale of hidden identities, unexpected love, and the dangerous game one man played with his own heart. Our story takes place in the northern realm of Silvercrest, a land of rolling hills, ancient forests, and a duchy ruled by one of the most enigmatic men in the kingdom, Duke Ashford Thorne. Now let me paint you a picture of this man. Ashford Thorne was not your typical nobleman. With jet-black hair that fell just past his collar, sharp grey eyes that seemed to see through any pretense, and a presence that commanded respect the moment he entered a room, he was both feared and admired. At 30 years old, he had transformed Silvercrest from a struggling territory into one of the most prosperous regions in the kingdom. He was brilliant, strategic, and utterly alone. You see, Ashford had learned a cruel lesson early in life. When he was younger, before his father's death thrust him into power, he'd believed in love. He'd trusted a woman named Vivienne, a beautiful countess who whispered sweet promises and gazed at him with what he thought was genuine affection. But the moment his father fell ill, the moment it seemed the Thorne family might lose everything, Vivienne vanished. She married a wealthier lord within a month. That betrayal carved something cold into Ashford's heart. He built his walls high and his duchy higher. But now pressure mounted from the royal court. At 30, unmarried and without an heir, the king himself had begun making pointed suggestions. Ashford needed a wife. But here's where our story truly begins. Ashford refused to repeat his past mistakes. He wouldn't be fooled by practiced smiles and rehearsed kindness again. So he devised a plan, a test, if you will, a dangerous one. On a crisp autumn morning, Ashford did something no one expected. He left his manor dressed not in fine silks and the ducal crest, but in the simple clothes of a common merchant. His personal guard, Marcus, the only person who knew his plan, had argued against it for hours. "Your Grace, this is madness," Marcus had said, his weathered face creased with worry. "If anyone discovers you wandering unprotected—" "Then I'll rely on my own skills as I did before I had a title," Ashford interrupted, checking the plain cloak around his shoulders. "I need to see the world as it truly is, Marcus. I need to meet someone who doesn't know my name, my wealth, or my position, someone who will show me who they really are." And so, calling himself simply Ash, the Duke of Silvercrest walked into the village of Thornfield, a small community on the edge of his own lands, far enough from the capital that few would recognize his face. The village was charming in its simplicity. Cobblestone streets wound between cottages with thatched roofs. The smell of fresh bread drifted from a bakery, mixing with the earthy scent of autumn leaves. Children played in the square while merchants called out their wares. Ashford felt something strange as he walked those streets, a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. No one bowed, no one watched their words around him. He was invisible, just another face in the crowd. That's when he saw her. Her name was Ilara Kinsley, though he wouldn't learn that until later. She stood outside a small cottage at the end of a winding path, tending to an herb garden even as the autumn chill set in. She wore a simple dress of deep forest green, her chestnut hair pulled back in a practical braid, and there was a smudge of dirt on her cheek that she seemed completely unaware of. But it wasn't her appearance that stopped Ashford in his tracks, it was what he witnessed next. An elderly man approached her cottage, hunched over a walking stick, clearly in pain. Ilara looked up from her work, and her entire face transformed with concern. Ashford watched from a distance as she immediately guided the man inside, not even pausing to brush the dirt from her hands. Curious, Ashford found himself drawing closer. Through the open window he could hear their conversation. "The pain's gotten worse, Miss Ilara," the old man said, his voice thin and tired. "Can't hardly work anymore, can't afford much, but I brought what I could." He held out a few copper coins, barely enough for a loaf of bread. Ilara's response was immediate and firm. "Thomas, put that away. I've told you before, your money's no good here." Her voice was warm but left no room for argument. "Now let me see that leg." Ashford watched, fascinated, as she worked. Her hands moved with practiced confidence, preparing a poultice from the herbs in her garden, mixing it with oils and other ingredients. She talked to Thomas the entire time, asking about his daughter, his grandchildren, making him laugh despite his pain. When she finished wrapping his leg, she pressed a small bundle into his hands. "This should last you 2 weeks. Apply it every morning and evening. And Thomas, I made extra honey cakes yesterday. Take some for the children." The old man's eyes grew wet. "You're too kind, miss, too kind by far." After Thomas left, Ashford found himself standing at Ilara's door. He told himself he was simply investigating a potential candidate for his test, but something about her had hooked into his curiosity and wouldn't let go. He knocked. When Ilara opened the door, she looked at him with those clear, honest eyes, the color of amber in sunlight, and smiled. "Hello, are you hurt or just lost?" Ashford realized he'd been staring. He cleared his throat, suddenly feeling off balance in a way that had nothing to do with his disguise. "Neither, I'm new to the village. I saw you with that man and wondered, are you a healer?" "Of sorts," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm an herbalist, I help where I can." She studied him with open curiosity but no recognition. "Perfect. You said you're new here. Are you staying in Thornfield?" "For a while," Ashford said, the lie coming easily. "I'm a merchant, Ash, my name is Ash." "Ilara," she responded, and when she smiled, something in Ashford's carefully constructed walls cracked just slightly. "Well, Ash the merchant, welcome to Thornfield. It's not much, but it's home." Over the next few days, Ashford found excuses to return to Ilara's cottage. He told himself he was conducting his test, observing her character when she thought no one important was watching. But the truth he wasn't quite ready to admit, was that he simply wanted to be near her. He learned that Ilara had lived in Thornfield her entire life. Her mother had been the village healer before her, teaching Ilara everything she knew before passing away 3 years ago. Her father, a woodworker, had died when she was young. "I know these people," she told Ash one afternoon as they walked through the village market together. "They're my family, even if we don't share blood. Old Thomas, he carved my first doll when I was 5. Marta the baker gave me bread when Mother was too sick to cook. How could I charge them for help when they've given me so much?" Ashford found himself asking, "But how do you survive, if you give your services freely?" "I don't give them freely to everyone," Ilara corrected with a gentle smile. "Travelers pay full price, wealthy merchants too." She gave him a playful look. "Though I haven't decided which category you fall into yet, Ash the mysterious." He laughed, actually laughed, something he rarely did anymore. "Mysterious. You appear in our village out of nowhere. You ask 100 questions but answer very few, and you have the hands of someone who's never done a day of hard labor in his life." She said it without judgment, just observation. "So yes, mysterious." Ashford looked down at his hands, cursing himself for that oversight. "You're very observant." "I have to be. Plants can't tell you what's wrong with them. People often won't. You learn to see what's not being said." As the days passed, Ashford's test evolved into something he hadn't anticipated. He wasn't just observing Ilara's kindness toward others, he was experiencing it himself. She never asked him for anything, never tried to impress him or present herself as anything other than who she was. When it rained, she invited him to wait out the storm in her cottage, serving him tea made from herbs in her garden. When he mentioned he was staying at the village inn, she insisted on packing him lunch each day. "The inn's food will kill you faster than any illness," she joked. She showed him her garden, explaining each plant with such passion that he found himself genuinely interested. "This is feverfew, terrible name for such a beautiful flower, but it works wonders for headaches. And this is lavender, which you probably know, but most people don't realize it also helps with burns and insect bites." Ashford realized he was learning more about his own lands from Ilara than he ever had from his official reports. She told him about the village's struggles. The harvest had been poor last year, the miller's wheel needed repairs that the village couldn't afford, and there were rumors that the lord who owned these lands, meaning himself, though she didn't know it, might raise taxes again. "Though I shouldn't speak ill of the Duke," Ilara said quickly. "I'm sure he has his reasons. The capital must make many demands." "What do you think of him?" Ashford asked, curious despite himself. "The Duke?" Ilara considered this carefully, her brow furrowing in thought. I've never met him, so I can only judge by his actions. He's made the duchy prosperous, they say, but prosperity in the capital doesn't always reach villages like ours. She paused, then added softly, I think perhaps he doesn't realize how his people truly live. How could he, surrounded by nobles and courtiers? They'd only tell him what he wants to hear. Her words struck deeper than she knew. When was the last time someone had been honest with him, really honest, without fear or favor-seeking? But it was one particular evening that changed everything for Ashford. He'd been in Thornfield for nearly 2 weeks when he came upon a scene in the village square. A well-dressed man, Lord Petrov, a minor noble who managed these lands in Ashford's name, stood before Ilara's cottage with 2 guards. A small crowd had gathered, worried. Can't continue to operate without proper licensing fees, Petrov was saying, his voice dripping with false authority. The Duke's law is clear. All merchants and tradespeople must pay their quarterly fees. Ilara stood in her doorway, chin raised despite the obvious fear in her eyes. I'm not a merchant, Lord Petrov, I'm a healer, I serve the village. You exchange goods and services, that makes you a merchant. Petrov held out a scroll. 20 silver marks, Miss Kinsley, due immediately. Ashford's jaw clenched. 20 silver marks for a village herbalist was highway robbery, and he'd authorized no such fee. Petrov was clearly lining his own pockets. I don't have 20 silver marks, Ilara said quietly. You know I don't. Then you'll have to cease your operations, effective immediately. Petrov smiled, and it was not kind. Unless, of course, we could come to some other arrangement. A young woman like yourself all alone. Ashford didn't remember deciding to move. He simply found himself stepping between Petrov and Ilara, his voice dropping to the cold, commanding tone that had cowed rebellious lords and hostile negotiations alike. That's enough. Petrov blinked, surprised by the interruption. And who are you? Someone who knows exploitation when he sees it, Ashford said quietly, dangerously. Miss Kinsley provides an essential service to this village. She'll pay no fees. This is duchy business. Then let's discuss it with the Duke, shall we? Ashford took a step forward, and something in his bearing made Petrov actually step back. I'm certain His Grace would be very interested to learn about unauthorized fees being collected in his name. I'm travelling to the capital next week. Should I carry a message? The bluff worked. Petrov's face paled slightly. That won't be necessary. Perhaps I was mistaken about the fee. I thought you might be. Ashford didn't move until Petrov and his guards left the square. When he finally turned back to Ilara, she was staring at him with wide eyes. That was incredibly foolish and incredibly brave, she said softly. He had no right. No, he didn't, but you made an enemy just now. She reached out, touching his arm gently. Thank you, Ash, but please be careful, men like Petrov have long memories. As they stood there in the fading light, her hand warm on his arm, Ashford realized something that should have terrified him. His test had failed completely. He hadn't remained objective. He hadn't kept his emotional distance. He'd fallen in love with her. And that changed everything. The situation Ashford found himself in was both wonderful and impossible. For the first time in his adult life, he'd found someone who saw him, truly saw him, not his title or his wealth. Ilara talked to him like an equal, argued with him when she disagreed, laughed at his jokes without any pretense. But with each passing day, the weight of his deception grew heavier. One evening, about 3 weeks into his stay, they sat together in her garden as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Ilara was teaching him about moon herbs, plants that had to be harvested at night to retain their potency. You have to listen to the plants, she explained, her fingers gentle on a silvery leaf. Everything living has a rhythm, a right time. Force it and you lose what makes it special. Ashford watched her face in the fading light, memorizing every detail. Is that how you approach everything, with patience? I try, she looked at him, and there was something new in her gaze, something warm and uncertain and hopeful. Though lately I find myself rather impatient about certain things. Such as... She bit her lip, a gesture he'd learned meant she was gathering courage. such as wondering when you're going to tell me the real reason you've stayed in Thornfield for 3 weeks when you claim to be just passing through. Ashford's heart seized. Did she know, had she discovered? I think, Ilara continued softly, that you might be running from something, or hiding, and I want you to know that whatever it is, whoever you really are, it doesn't matter to me, because the man I've come to know these past weeks, he's kind and thoughtful and makes me laugh and challenged a corrupt lord to protect me even though he had nothing to gain from it. She took a breath. That's the man I'm falling in love with. The words hung in the air between them, brave and vulnerable and absolutely devastating. Ashford knew he should tell her the truth, right then, right there, but the words stuck in his throat because he was terrified, actually terrified, that once she knew he was the Duke, everything would change. She'd start watching her words, second-guessing her actions, seeing his title instead of him. So instead he reached out and cupped her face in his hand, memorizing the way she leaned into his touch. Ilara, he swallowed hard. There are things about me you don't know, things I need to tell you, but I don't know how without losing this, without losing you. You won't lose me, she whispered, whatever it is. You don't know that. The words came out more harshly than he intended. He stood abruptly, running a hand through his black hair. I should go, it's late. He saw the hurt flash across her face before she hid it. Of course, good night, Ash. As he walked back to the inn, Ashford hated himself. He was a coward. He'd faced down hostile armies, navigated deadly political intrigue, rebuilt an entire duchy, but he couldn't find the courage to tell one honest woman the truth. Meanwhile, forces were moving that neither of them anticipated. Marcus, Ashford's guard, had been staying in a neighbouring village, watching from a distance as ordered. But he'd also been sending reports back to the capital, and those reports had attracted attention from someone Ashford had hoped to avoid, Lady Cordelia Ashmont. Cordelia was beautiful, ambitious, and determined to become the next Duchess of Silvercrest. Her father, Lord Ashmont, was one of the king's closest advisers, and they'd been pressuring Ashford to consider a match for months. When Cordelia learned through her networks that the Duke had vanished to some remote village, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She arrived in Thornfield like a storm dressed in silk. Ashford was walking with Ilara through the market when he heard the commotion. Horses, many of them, and a carriage bearing a noble crest. His blood ran cold. My goodness, Ilara breathed beside him. That's a lord's carriage or a lady's. I wonder what brings nobility to Thornfield. Ashford knew exactly what had brought them, and he needed to intercept Cordelia before she revealed him. Ilara, I need to. But it was too late. Cordelia emerged from the carriage in a gown that cost more than most villagers earned in a year, her golden hair perfectly arranged, her smile sharp as a blade. Her eyes scanned the crowd and locked onto Ashford immediately. There you are, she called out, moving toward him with practiced grace. Your Grace, we've been so worried. The words fell like stones into water, rippling out with devastating effect. Ashford saw the exact moment Ilara processed what Cordelia had said. The way her amber eyes widened, then moved from Cordelia to him. The way her hand, which had been resting comfortably on his arm, slowly fell away. Your Grace, Ilara repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Cordelia reached them, looping her arm through Ashford's with possessive familiarity. Duke Ashford Thorne, honestly, disappearing like that without a proper guard. You gave us all such a fright. She turned her smile to Ilara, and it was the smile of a cat who'd cornered a mouse. And who is this charming village girl? Ashford gently but firmly extracted his arm from Cordelia's grasp. Lady Cordelia, this is neither the time nor the place. For what? For rescuing you from this little rural adventure, Cordelia laughed. Darling, you've made your point. Yes, you needed some air, some space. But the King's autumn ball is in 3 days and your presence is required. Our presence, she added meaningfully. Ilara had gone very still. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. Duke Thorne, of course, how foolish of me not to see it. She looked at him and the betrayal in her eyes cut deeper than any blade. You must excuse me, Your Grace. I have patients to attend to. Ilara, please. Ashford reached for her, but she stepped back. Don't, just that one word, but it held a world of hurt. Then she turned and walked away, her spine straight, her head high, even as Ashford could see her hands trembling at her sides. He moved to follow, but Cordelia's voice stopped him. "Let her go, Ashford. Really, what did you expect? That you could play pretend indefinitely?" Her voice softened, became almost sympathetic. "Come now, you've had your little test, learned what you needed to learn. Time to return to reality." Ashford turned to face Cordelia, and something in his expression made her step back. "You had no right to come here." "I had every right. I'm going to be your Duchess." "No," Ashford said quietly, coldly. "You're not. I've never promised you that, never given you any indication that I would. That's your father's ambition speaking, not reality." Cordelia's beautiful face twisted. "And what, you think you'll marry her? A common village herbalist with dirt under her fingernails? The court would eat her alive, the king would never approve such a match." "That's not your concern, isn't it?" Cordelia's eyes glittered with malice now. "Do you know what they'll say about her? About how she must have seduced the great Duke Thorne, trapped him with common tricks? They'll destroy her reputation, Ashford. Even if you're foolish enough to pursue this, you'll only ruin her." The worst part was that Cordelia was right, and they both knew it. The next day, Ashford tried to see Ilara, but she refused to open her door to him. He stood outside her cottage, feeling helpless in a way that all his power and position couldn't fix. "Ilara, please, let me explain." Her voice came from inside, muffled but firm. "There's nothing to explain, Your Grace. You lied about who you were, you made a fool of me, I understand completely." "It wasn't like that, I never meant to hurt you." A long silence. Then, "What did you mean to do then? Was I a test, an amusement, a way to pass the time while slumming in your own duchy?" "No, God, no, Ilara, He pressed his hand against the door, wishing he could break through more than just wood. "I was trying to find someone real, someone who would see me, not my title. And I found you, and you were everything I didn't know I was searching for." "And yet you kept lying." Her voice cracked. "Every day, every conversation, every moment we spent together, you were lying." "I was going to tell you, I swear I was." "When, after we'd..." She didn't finish. "Please go, please, I can't do this." Ashford rested his forehead against her door, defeated. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know I have no right to say that now, but it's true. I love you, Ilara." No response came. Finally, he turned and walked away, back to where Marcus waited with horses. "We're leaving," Ashford said flatly. "Your Grace, if you would just give her time." "Time won't fix this, Marcus. Lady Cordelia saw to that." Ashford mounted his horse, looking back at Ilara's cottage one last time. "I did exactly what I swore I wouldn't do. I hurt someone good and honest because of my own fear and selfishness." As they rode away, Ashford didn't see Ilara watching from her window, tears streaming down her face, one hand pressed against the glass. But our story wasn't the only one unfolding in Thornfield. After Ashford left, Lord Petrov returned to the village, and this time he wasn't alone. He'd brought official documents, forged ones, though the villagers had no way of knowing that, claiming that Ilara's cottage and land were actually duchy property, being held illegally. Ilara was given 1 week to vacate or face arrest. Old Thomas came to her that evening, his face grave. "It's revenge, miss. That Petrov creature is punishing you for what happened in the square, for your connection to the Duke." "I have no connection to the Duke," Ilara said bitterly, even as her heart ached at the words. "Maybe not, but Petrov doesn't know that. He sees an opportunity to hurt both you and his Grace." Thomas gripped his walking stick. "We won't let him take your home, miss. The whole village will stand with you." But Ilara knew that the whole village standing together couldn't fight legal documents and armed guards. She sat in her mother's cottage, the home she'd grown up in, where every corner held a memory, and faced a terrible truth. The Duke had broken her heart, and now his world was taking everything else she had. That night she made a decision. She would go to the capital, not to see Ashford, never that, but to petition the king's court directly, to prove her mother had legally owned this land, that she had the right to stay. It was a desperate plan, and she knew it. A common village girl approaching the royal court, she'd likely be turned away at the gates, but what choice did she have? As she packed a small bag, her hands stilled on a dried lavender bundle she'd been preparing. She'd been making it for Ash, for the Duke, because he'd mentioned having trouble sleeping. Such a small, foolish gesture now. She crushed it in her hand, then threw it in the fire. The next morning, Ilara left for the capital, unaware that her arrival would set off a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of the duchy. And in the capital, Ashford sat in his study, staring at documents he couldn't focus on, his mind full of amber eyes and honest smiles, and the woman he'd lost through his own cowardice. Marcus entered without knocking, a privilege of long friendship. "Your Grace, you can't continue like this. You haven't eaten, haven't slept." "I don't deserve to sleep," Ashford said quietly. "I did to her exactly what Vivienne did to me. I pretended to be someone I wasn't, let her trust me, and then shattered that trust." "It's not the same." "Isn't it? The specifics differ, but the betrayal is identical." Ashford stood, moving to the window that overlooked his estate. "For years I built walls to protect myself from being hurt again. I succeeded, but I never considered that I might become the one inflicting the hurt." "So what will you do?" Ashford was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if there's anything I can do. Ilara deserves better than a man who lied to her, better than the complications my world would bring her. Perhaps the kindest thing is to let her go." "And if she doesn't want to be let go?" "She made her wishes very clear, Marcus." What Ashford didn't know was that Cordelia, furious at being rejected, had been busy. She'd heard whispers about Petrov's actions in Thornfield. She had spies everywhere, and instead of reporting them to Ashford, she'd encouraged them. If the little herbalist was humiliated, forced from her home, she'd never dare show her face in the capital. It was a cruel game, and Cordelia played it well. But she'd underestimated Ilara's courage. 3 days after leaving Thornfield, Ilara stood before the gates of the royal palace, travel-worn and exhausted but determined. The guards looked at her with barely concealed contempt. "Petitions are heard on Tuesdays," one said dismissively, "and only with proper sponsorship." "Then I'll wait until Tuesday," Ilara said firmly, "and I'll find sponsorship." She'd brought very little money with her, enough for maybe 2 nights at a cheap inn. After that, she'd worry about it after that. As she turned to leave, an elderly woman in fine but understated dress approached. "Excuse me, dear, I couldn't help but overhear. You're seeking to petition the court." Ilara nodded warily. "Yes, ma'am." The woman studied her with sharp, intelligent eyes. "What's your name, child?" "Ilara Kinsley, ma'am, from Thornfield." Something flickered in the woman's expression, recognition. Thornfield in Silvercrest, Duke Thorn's territory. At the mention of his name, Ilara felt her composure crack slightly. "Yes." The woman seemed to make a decision. "My name is Duchess Helena Morven. I'm an old friend of the royal family. Perhaps we should talk, Miss Kinsley. I have a feeling your story might be worth hearing." As Ilara followed the Duchess to a nearby tea house, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows, one of Cordelia's servants, already rushing to report this development. The pieces were moving, the collision was inevitable. And at the center of it all was a truth that Ashford was only beginning to understand. Love wasn't something you could test for or protect yourself from. It was a risk, a vulnerability, a choice to trust despite the danger of being hurt. He'd failed that test once. But the story wasn't over yet. Duchess Helena Morven was not what Ilara expected. In a private room at one of the capital's elegant tea houses, the older woman listened to Ilara's entire story without interruption. The cottage, her mother's legacy, Lord Petrov's corruption, and finally, painfully, the truth about Ash, who was really Duke Ashford Thorn. When Ilara finished, her tea had gone cold, and her throat was tight with suppressed emotion. Helena sat back, her expression thoughtful. "You love him," she said simply. "That doesn't matter." "It's the only thing that matters, child." Helena's eyes were kind but sharp. "I've known Ashford since he was a boy. I was close friends with his mother before she passed. He's a good man, but he's been wounded, and wounded people often hurt others even when they don't mean to." "I understand why he lied," Ilara admitted quietly. I even understand his reasons, but he kept lying day after day, even as she stopped, collecting herself. I told him I was falling in love with him and he still said nothing. That's what I can't forgive. Helena nodded slowly. And Petrov, this scheme to take your home? I have my mother's deed papers. They prove legal ownership going back 30 years. If I can just present them to someone who'll actually look. I'll do more than look, I'll sponsor your petition personally. Helena raised a hand at Ilara's shocked expression. I won't interfere in matters of the heart, that's between you and Ashford, but in justice I can help with. We'll bring your case before the King's magistrate tomorrow. Ilara felt tears prick her eyes. Why would you help me? You don't know me. Because someone once helped me when I was young and lost and facing a powerful enemy, Helena said softly. And because I see something in you that this court desperately needs, genuine goodness. Whether or not you end up part of Ashford's life, the world needs more people like you in positions where they can make a difference. That night, Ilara stayed in a guest room at Helena's townhouse, far more luxurious than anywhere she'd ever slept. But comfort didn't bring sleep. She kept thinking about Ashford, wondering if he was somewhere in this vast city, if he ever thought about her. He was thinking about her. In fact, he'd thought of little else. Ashford sat in his study, going through reports Marcus had brought from Thornfield. As he read about Petrov's latest actions, cold fury built in his chest. This ends tomorrow, he said, his voice deadly quiet. I want Petrov arrested and brought before the magistrate. I want every penny he's stolen from my people recovered. And I want... Your Grace, Marcus's voice was urgent. There's something else you need to know. My contact in the palace sent word. A young woman matching Miss Kinsley's description was seen entering the city 3 days ago. She's staying with Duchess Morven. Ashford's head snapped up. Ilara's here in the capital. It appears so, and Duchess Morven has sponsored a petition to be heard tomorrow before the King's magistrate. Marcus paused. I suspect it concerns Petrov's claims on her property. Ashford was already standing, reaching for his coat. I need to see her. Your Grace, wait. Marcus stepped in front of him, an unprecedented move. Think, if you go to her now, angry and protective, what does that solve? She needs to fight this battle herself to prove to herself most of all that she's not helpless, not dependent on you or your title. But I can help her. You can help her by dealing with Petrov through official channels. You can help by ensuring the magistrate who hears her case is honest. You can help by giving her the space to be strong. Marcus's weathered face was sympathetic. And then, when this is over, you can tell her the truth you should have told her from the beginning. Ashford wanted to argue, but he knew Marcus was right. He'd taken Ilara's agency once by lying to her. He wouldn't do it again by fighting her battles for her. But that didn't mean he'd leave her completely unprotected. Fine, he said finally. I'll stay away from her, but I want you at the magistrate's hearing tomorrow. I want to know everything that happens, and Marcus, if Petrov tries anything at all, I want to know immediately. What neither of them knew was that Cordelia had plans of her own. She'd learned about Ilara's petition through her network of servants and spies, and she'd realized this was an opportunity. If she could publicly humiliate the little herbalist, prove her to be a liar or a social climber trying to use her connection to the Duke, it would end any possibility of Ashford pursuing her. So Cordelia arranged for allies in the court, judges who owed her father favours, nobles who wanted the Ashmont family's support. The fix was in before the hearing even began. The next morning Ilara stood in the magistrate's hall, her mother's deed papers clutched in her hands, trying not to show how terrified she was. The room was all dark wood and high ceilings, designed to make petitioners feel small. It worked. Duchess Helena sat in the gallery, offering a reassuring nod. A few other nobles were scattered about, watching the proceedings with bored curiosity. Ilara didn't notice the tall figure in the back corner, half hidden in shadows, with black hair and grey eyes that never left her face. Lord Petrov stood across from her with his lawyer, looking supremely confident. The magistrate, a thin man with cold eyes named Lord Venn, called the hearing to order. Miss Kinsley, you claim that property in Thornfield legally belongs to you, contested by Lord Petrov as duchy land. Present your evidence. Ilara stepped forward, her voice steadier than she felt. My mother, Sarah Kinsley, was deeded that property 30 years ago in recognition of her service as the duchy's official herbalist. I have the original deed here, signed and sealed. She presented the document. Lord Venn barely glanced at it. Lord Petrov. Petrov's lawyer, a slick man who spoke with practiced ease, stepped forward. Your Honour, while this document may appear legitimate, we have evidence that Sarah Kinsley never actually fulfilled the terms of her service contract. Furthermore, Miss Kinsley herself has no official standing. She's an unlicensed practitioner, operating illegally. That's not true, Ilara protested. My mother served the duchy for 20 years, and I've never claimed to be anything but an herbalist helping her community. A community you've been exploiting, Petrov interjected smoothly, charging exorbitant fees, taking advantage of the sick and elderly. I've never charged the villagers, I help them freely. So you admit to operating a business without proper licensing or taxation? Lord Venn raised an eyebrow. Ilara felt the trap close around her. I'm not operating a business, I'm helping people. The law makes no such distinction. Venn looked down at her with thinly veiled contempt. Furthermore, there are questions about your character, Miss Kinsley, serious questions. Cordelia chose that moment to stand in the gallery. If I may address the court, Your Honour. Venn nodded. Lady Cordelia Ashmont, of course. Ilara's stomach dropped as Cordelia moved to the centre of the room, every inch the elegant noblewoman. Her smile was poison wrapped in silk. I hesitate to speak on such a delicate matter, Cordelia began, her voice dripping with false sympathy. But the court should know that Miss Kinsley recently spent several weeks in an inappropriate relationship with a nobleman whose identity she was well aware of. She pursued this connection with the clear intention of using it to advance her social standing and protect her property claims. The room erupted in whispers. Ilara felt her face go hot. That's not I didn't know. You're claiming you didn't know you were involved with Duke Ashford Thorne. Cordelia's eyes glittered with triumph. How convenient. A simple village girl, completely unaware that the man courting her was one of the most powerful nobles in the kingdom. He wasn't courting me and I didn't know who he was. Ilara's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. He lied about his identity. Or perhaps you're lying now, Cordelia suggested. Perhaps you knew exactly who he was and saw an opportunity. Seduce the Duke, secure your property, perhaps even trap him into marriage. In the back corner, Ashford had heard enough. He'd promised Marcus he'd stay out of it, let Ilara handle it herself. But he wouldn't stand here and let Cordelia destroy her reputation with lies. He stepped out of the shadows, and his voice cut through the room like a blade. That's enough. Every head turned. The whispers died into shocked silence. Ashford walked forward, his presence commanding instant respect and attention. Lord Venn stood quickly. Your Grace, we had no idea you were present. Clearly, Ashford's eyes were cold as they swept the room, lingering on Petrov and Cordelia before settling on Ilara. Her face was pale, her amber eyes wide with shock and something else, something that might have been hope or might have been pain. He couldn't tell. Your Grace, Cordelia began, her voice honey-sweet, I was simply trying to help the court understand. You were lying, Ashford said flatly. Miss Kinsley had no idea who I was. I deliberately concealed my identity from her. Any relationship that developed did so under false pretenses, my false pretenses. He turned to the magistrate. Lord Venn, I'm curious why you're hearing this case. Property disputes in Silvercrest fall under my jurisdiction, not the King's magistrate. Venn paled slightly. Lord Petrov requested neutral oversight, Your Grace, given certain complications. The only complication I see is that my representative has been stealing from my people and falsifying documents to seize property that doesn't belong to the duchy. Ashford's voice could have frozen fire. Miss Kinsley's mother was indeed granted that property in perpetuity. I have the records in my own archives to prove it. He pulled out a document. He'd brought his mother's personal journals which referenced Sarah Kinsley's service and the land grant. Furthermore, the herbalist position has never required formal licensing in Silvercrest, as traditional healers have served our communities for generations. Petrov knew this. His claims are fraudulent. Lord Venn looked between Ashford and Petrov like a trapped animal. Your Grace, if there's been a misunderstanding. There's been corruption and harassment, enabled by officials who look the other way. Ashford turned to Petrov, and the Lord actually stumbled back a step. You're stripped of your position, effective immediately. You'll face formal charges of fraud and extortion. Guards. Palace guards appeared immediately. As they led a protesting Petrov away, Ashford addressed the room one more time. Miss Kinsley's claim is validated. The property is legally hers without question. This hearing is concluded. The room erupted in whispers again, but Ashford only had eyes for Ilara. She stood frozen, her expression unreadable. He approached her slowly, aware that everyone was watching but unable to care. Ilara. Don't, her voice was quiet but firm. Don't do this here, please. He stopped, pain lancing through his chest. I needed to tell the truth. I needed them to know you did nothing wrong. By telling everyone that you lied to me, by making me look like a fool in front of the entire court. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I know you meant to help, but this, she gestured around them at the staring nobles, this just makes everything worse. Before he could respond, she turned and walked out, her head high despite everything, dignity in every line of her body. Duchess Helena appeared at Ashford's side. That went well, she said dryly. I had to do something. You had to be the hero to fix everything with your power and position. But did you ask her what she wanted? Helena shook her head. You're still not seeing her clearly, Ashford. She doesn't need you to save her. She needs you to trust that she can save herself. As Ashford stood in the now emptying hall, Cordelia approached one last time. This isn't over, she said quietly, all pretense of sweetness gone. My father won't stand for this humiliation. Your father, Ashford interrupted coldly, will accept that his ambitions for a political marriage have failed. And Cordelia, if you ever speak against Ilara again, if you ever attempt to harm her in any way, you'll discover exactly how ruthless I can be when protecting people I love. He leaned closer. I've been patient with you out of respect for your father's position. That patience is exhausted. For the first time, Cordelia looked uncertain. Then she turned and left in a rustle of expensive silk and wounded pride. Marcus appeared from the crowd. Your Grace, what now? Ashford looked toward the door Ilara had disappeared through. Now I do what I should have done from the beginning. I tell her the complete truth with no audience, no power plays, no rescue attempts, just honesty. He paused. If she'll even see me. She will, Helena said quietly. She's staying at my townhouse. Come tomorrow evening. I'll make sure she's there, but Ashford, what you do with that chance is up to you. Don't waste it. That night Ilara sat in Helena's garden, wrapped in a shawl against the autumn chill. She should have felt victorious. She'd won her case, kept her home, seen Petrov punished for his crimes. But all she felt was exhausted and confused. Ashford had defended her in front of everyone. He'd validated her claim, destroyed his political rival, put his own reputation on the line by admitting he'd lied to her. But he'd also taken away her moment. She'd wanted to stand on her own to prove she could fight her own battles. And he'd swept in and solved everything with his power and authority, just like the Duke he was. You're overthinking, Helena said, appearing with tea. I can practically hear it from inside. Ilara accepted the cup gratefully. I don't know what I feel. I'm angry and grateful and hurt and confused all at once. That's called being in love with a complicated man. Helena sat beside her. Can I tell you something about Ashford, about his mother? Ilara nodded. Catherine Thorne was a remarkable woman. She wasn't born to nobility, she was the daughter of a scholar. When she married Ashford's father, the court was scandalized. They said she was too common, too educated, too opinionated. They made her life hell. Helena's voice grew soft with memory. But she endured it all with grace and strength, and she taught her son that true worth has nothing to do with birth or title. She died when Ashford was 17, and I think part of him died with her. Why are you telling me this? Because you remind me of her, Helena said simply. That same strength, that same genuineness. And I think that's what terrifies Ashford most. He loved his mother completely, lost her, and swore never to be that vulnerable again. Then you came along and broke through every defense he'd built. Ilara was quiet for a long moment. What am I supposed to do with that? Whatever your heart tells you, Helena said. But first you should probably listen to what he has to say. He's coming tomorrow evening. I told him I'd make sure you were here, but the choice to see him is entirely yours. Ilara stared into her tea, seeing Ash's face in the steam. No, Ashford's face. The man she'd fallen in love with and the Duke were the same person, but reconciling those two versions felt impossible. Tomorrow would bring answers, or it would bring an ending. Either way, she knew nothing would ever be the same. The sun was setting when Ashford arrived at Duchess Helena's townhouse, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold that reminded him painfully of Ilara's eyes. He'd spent the entire day preparing what to say, practicing words that felt inadequate for the task ahead. Helena met him at the door. She's in the garden, and Ashford, don't try to be the Duke tonight, just be Ash, that's who she fell in love with. The garden was beautiful in the twilight, filled with late-blooming flowers and the soft glow of lanterns. Ilara stood by a fountain, her back to him, her chestnut hair loose around her shoulders. For a moment, Ashford just looked at her, memorizing the sight, terrified it might be the last time he saw her like this. Then she spoke without turning. I didn't think I'd see you again. After yesterday I thought that I'd solved the problem and move on. Ashford moved closer, stopping a respectful distance away. I don't blame you for thinking that. It's what I've done my entire life. Identified issues, applied power, moved to the next crisis. But Ilara, you're not a problem to be solved. You never were. She turned then and he saw she'd been crying. The sight broke something in him. Then what am I? She asked quietly. A test, an experiment, a brief escape from your real life. You're the first real thing I've experienced in 10 years, Ashford said, the words raw and honest. You're the first person who saw me, actually saw me, and didn't want something in return. You're the woman I fell in love with despite every intention not to. But you lied to me, her voice cracked. Every day, every conversation, every moment I thought we were building something true, it was built on deception. Yes, he didn't try to justify it or explain it away. I lied because I was a coward. I was so afraid of being hurt again, so convinced that no one could love me without my title, that I sabotaged the first genuine connection I'd found. And in protecting myself I hurt you, unforgivably. Ilara wrapped her arms around herself. Do you know what the worst part was? It wasn't discovering you were the Duke. It was realizing that you didn't trust me. I told you I was falling in love with you and you still couldn't be honest. What does that say about what you thought of me? The accusation hit its mark. Ashford felt it like a physical blow. You're right, I didn't trust you, but not because of anything you did. I didn't trust myself. I didn't believe I deserved something real. He took a breath. My mother, did Helena tell you about her? She was everything to me. Genuine, kind, strong. When she died, I watched my father crumble. He'd loved her so much that losing her destroyed him. He died less than a year later, and I always believed it was from a broken heart. Ashford's voice roughened. I was 17, suddenly responsible for an entire duchy, and I swore I'd never let myself be that vulnerable. I'd never love someone so much that losing them could break me. He looked at Ilara, letting her see everything he'd kept hidden. Then I met you, and every defense I'd built meant nothing. You broke through them all without even trying, and that terrified me more than anything I've ever faced. Ilara's expression softened slightly. So you pushed me away by keeping your secrets. I tried to find the courage to tell you. Every day I told myself, today I'll be honest. But then you'd smile at me or laugh at something I said, or look at me like I was just Ash, just a man worth knowing, and I couldn't bear to risk losing that. He stepped closer. I know that's selfish, I know I hurt you. But Ilara, everything I felt was real. Every conversation, every moment together, that was the most honest I've been with anyone in a decade. Even though you were lying about your name, your identity, everything about yourself. I wasn't lying about myself, Ashford said urgently. I was hiding my title, but everything else, my thoughts, my feelings, who I am when no one's watching, that was real. The man who walked through Thornfield with you, who learned about moon herbs and listened to you talk about your mother, who wanted to protect you from Petrov, that was me. That was the truest version of myself I've been in years. Tears spilled down Ilara's cheeks. But how can I trust that? How do I know what's real and what's the role you're playing? Because I'm standing here in front of you with no disguises and no defenses, telling you that I love you. Ashford's voice broke. I love you, Ilara Kinsley. I love your kindness and your strength. I love how you see the good in people and fight for what's right. I love how you make me want to be better, to deserve you. And I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm asking for one anyway, because I can't imagine my life without you in it. The silence that followed felt eternal. Then Ilara spoke, her voice small and broken. I want to believe you. I want to forgive you and fall into your arms and pretend none of this happened. But I'm scared, Ashford. I'm scared that I'll trust you again and you'll hurt me worse next time. I know, he wanted desperately to touch her, to close the distance between them, but he held himself still. And I can't promise I'll never hurt you. People who love each other hurt each other sometimes, it's inevitable. But I can promise I'll never lie to you again. I can promise that I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of your trust. And I can promise that if you give me a chance, I'll love you with everything I am. Ilara wiped at her tears, struggling with the warring emotions on her face. Your world is so different from mine. Yesterday in that hall I felt like I couldn't breathe. All those nobles staring at me, judging me, whispering about me. That's your life, Ashford. If we, how could I ever fit into that? You wouldn't fit into it, Ashford said simply. You'd change it, just like you changed me. He dared to step closer. Ilara, I'm not asking you to become someone different. I'm asking if you'll let me into your world instead. I don't want a duchess who'll navigate court politics and smile at people she hates. I want a partner who'll call me out when I'm wrong, who'll remind me what really matters, who'll help me be the kind of duke my people deserve. That's a pretty speech, Ilara said, but there was a hint of warmth in her voice now. Did you practice it? For 6 hours, Ashford admitted, and was rewarded with a small, watery laugh. I had 17 different versions. Marcus said this one was least likely to make me sound like an idiot, though he wasn't optimistic about my chances. Another laugh, slightly stronger. Ashford felt hope kindle in his chest. I don't want to make this decision right now, Ilara said finally. I'm still hurt, still confused. I need time to think, to figure out what I really want. The hope dimmed, but Ashford nodded. Of course, take all the time you need. But, Ilara continued, and his eyes snapped back to hers, I'm willing to try. Not to go back to what we were, we can't do that. But maybe to find something new, something built on honesty instead of deception. Anything, Ashford said immediately. Whatever you need, whatever pace you set. Stop, Ilara held up a hand, but she was almost smiling. Stop trying to give me everything I want. Stop trying to fix this instantly. Just be patient with me. Can you do that? I can do that, Ashford promised, though I should warn you, patience has never been my strong suit. I've noticed. This time her smile reached her eyes. The great Duke Thorn, used to getting his way immediately, brought to his knees by a village herbalist. The court would be scandalized. The court can go hang, Ashford said firmly. I don't care what they think. You might need to care a little, Ilara pointed out. You're still the Duke. You still have responsibilities, people depending on you. Then help me balance it. He finally allowed himself to reach out, taking her hand gently. She didn't pull away. Help me be the kind of leader who doesn't forget the villages like Thornfield, who doesn't let people like Petrov abuse their power. You said I don't know how my people truly live. Teach me. Show me. Ilara looked down at their joined hands. This is going to be complicated. Probably. People will talk, they'll say terrible things about both of us. Almost certainly. And I won't change who I am. I won't stop helping people just because some nobles think it's beneath a duchess. She stopped, flushing. I mean, I'm not saying I'll be, that's not what I meant. Ilara, Ashford waited until she met his eyes. I'm not asking you to change, and yes, I very much hope that someday you'll be my duchess, but right now I'm just asking if we can start again, properly this time. She was quiet for a long moment, searching his face, then she took a deep breath. Okay, we can try. The relief that flooded through Ashford was so intense it made him dizzy. "Thank you, I swear you won't regret." "Don't make promises you can't keep," Ilara interrupted, but she was smiling. "Just be honest with me from now on, that's all I ask." "I can do that," he squeezed her hand gently. "Starting now, I want to kiss you so badly it's taking all my self-control not to." Ilara laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "Well, at least you're honest about it." "Always," Ashford promised. "From now on, always." She studied him for another moment, then stepped closer. "One kiss, to see if it feels the same as when you were just Ash." Ashford cupped her face in his hands, gentle and reverent. "I was always just Ash with you, that was the whole problem." When he kissed her, it was soft and careful and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, Ilara was smiling. "It feels the same," she whispered. "Good," Ashford murmured against her forehead, "because I plan to spend a very long time reminding you of that." The next few weeks were a careful dance of rebuilding trust. Ashford didn't push, didn't rush. He courted Ilara properly, with a chaperone, Helena, who found the whole thing vastly entertaining, and honest conversations about everything from his childhood to his fears to his plans for the duchy. Ilara, in turn, began to understand the weight Ashford carried. She saw him work late into the night reviewing petitions, making decisions that affected thousands of lives. She watched him navigate complex political situations with a wisdom that came from years of experience. But she also saw moments when he'd look to her for advice, genuinely valuing her perspective. He started including her in discussions about Thornfield's development, asking what the village really needed instead of assuming he knew best. "A proper mill," Ilara told him one evening as they walked through Helena's garden, their regular meeting place. "The old one breaks down constantly, and the road to the market town needs repairs. During spring rains it becomes impassable." Ashford made notes in a small book he now carried everywhere. "What else?" "A real schoolhouse. The children are taught in the church basement when the priest has time, but it's not enough. They deserve better." "Agreed, I'll allocate funds for all 3 projects." He looked up at her. "Come with me to Thornfield next week. Help me understand what else I've been missing." "You want me to tour your duchy with you?" "I want you to show me my own duchy through your eyes," Ashford corrected. "I've been the Duke for 10 years, Ilara. I thought I knew my lands, my people, but I saw more in 3 weeks with you than I'd seen in a decade of official reports." So Ilara returned to Thornfield, this time arriving openly with Duke Ashford Thorne and a full retinue. The villagers were shocked, then cautiously hopeful. Old Thomas approached them in the square, leaning on his stick. "Your Grace," he said formally, then looked at Ilara with a twinkle in his eye. "Miss Ilara, I see you've been busy in the capital." Ilara blushed, but Ashford stepped forward. "Thomas, isn't it? Miss Kinsley tells me you're the finest woodcarver in Thornfield. I'm commissioning a new schoolhouse for the village. Would you be interested in the carpentry work?" Thomas's eyes widened. "A schoolhouse, truly?" "Truly, and a new mill and road repairs." Ashford's voice carried across the gathering crowd. "I owe this village an apology. I've been a negligent landlord relying on representatives who didn't have your best interests at heart. That changes now." Over the next few days, Ashford met with every family in Thornfield, listened to their concerns, and made detailed plans for improvements. And beside him always was Ilara, bridging the gap between the powerful Duke and the common people who both feared and needed him. The villagers watched the way he looked at their herbalist, with respect and love and something like awe, and they began to hope that perhaps nobility wasn't so removed from their world after all. But of course, not everyone was happy about the developing romance. Word reached the capital quickly. The Duke of Silvercrest was courting a common herbalist. The scandal rippled through court like wildfire. Some were amused, others scandalized, but Lord Ashmont, Cordelia's father, was furious. He requested an audience with Ashford immediately upon his return to the capital. Ashford received him in his study, standing behind his desk like the Duke he was. "Lord Ashmont, what can I do for you?" Ashmont was a large man with a red face and an inflated sense of his own importance. "You can explain why you're making a mockery of your position by dallying with a village girl." I'm not dallying with anyone, Ashford said coldly. I'm courting Miss Kinsley with the intention of marrying her. You can't be serious. The king will never approve such a match. The king, Ashford interrupted, has already given his blessing. I met with him yesterday. This was true. King Edward, an old friend of Ashford's late mother, had listened to the entire story and laughed until tears ran down his face. About time someone knocked you off your high horse, Ashford, he'd said. Bring this herbalist of yours to court. I'd like to meet the woman who managed what every ambitious mother in the kingdom has failed to accomplish. Ashmont sputtered. But the scandal, your position, what about Cordelia? What about her? Ashford's voice dropped dangerously. I never promised your daughter anything. You created expectations that had no basis in reality. That's not my responsibility. This is an insult to my family. No, this is me living my life and choosing my own wife. If you or Cordelia have a problem with that, I suggest you take it up with the king since he's already approved. Ashford moved around the desk, using his full height and presence to loom over the other man. And Lord Ashmont, if I hear of any attempts to harm Miss Kinsley's reputation or safety, if even one whisper of slander reaches my ears, I will consider it a personal attack. Do I make myself clear? Ashmont had no choice but to retreat, his face purple with rage. Marcus, who'd been standing guard outside, entered after the Lord left. That could have gone better. Or worse, Ashford countered. He could have challenged me to a duel. Would you have accepted? For Ilara, without hesitation. Ashford returned to his desk, feeling tired but resolved. Marcus, I need you to increase security around Helena's townhouse. I don't trust the Ashmonts not to try something petty and cruel. Already done, Your Grace. That night Ashford had dinner with Ilara at Helena's house, a regular occurrence now. Over roasted chicken and vegetables, he told her about Ashmont's visit. Ilara set down her fork, looking troubled. I'm causing problems for you. You're not causing anything. Ashmont's wounded pride is causing problems, which is entirely his own fault. Ashford reached across the table to take her hand. Ilara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. She tensed slightly. What is it? This life, this world, my world, is it something you can see yourself in, not just visiting but living in permanently? He rushed on before she could answer. I know it's complicated and political and full of people like Cordelia and Ashmont. I know it's nothing like the life you've built in Thornfield. And I know I'm asking you to give up a lot, but I need to know if it's something you could want. Ilara was quiet for a long moment, her amber eyes thoughtful. A month ago I would have said no without hesitation. This world terrified me, it still does sometimes. Ashford's heart sank, but she continued. But I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about changing your world instead of fitting into it, and I've been watching you these past weeks, really watching. She smiled softly. You're trying so hard to be better, to see your responsibility differently. You listen to people now. You care about villages like Thornfield in a way you didn't before. Because of you, Ashford said quietly. Maybe you always had that capacity and just needed someone to remind you. She squeezed his hand. But here's what I realized. I could make a difference here. As your wife, as a duchess, I'd have resources and influence I'd never have as a village herbalist. I could help more people, create real change. Yes, I'd have to deal with people like Cordelia and her father. Yes, I'd have to learn to navigate politics and court life. But I'd also have you beside me, and that makes it feel possible. Hope bloomed in Ashford's chest. Are you saying? I'm saying ask me again, Ilara said, her eyes bright. Properly this time. Not in a garden with everything still uncertain between us, but here now, when we both know what we are choosing. Ashford stood slowly, never breaking eye contact. Then, in a move that would have shocked every noble in the kingdom, the powerful Duke of Silvercrest dropped to one knee in front of a common herbalist. Ilara Kinsley, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You are the strongest, kindest, most genuine person I've ever known. You've changed my life in ways I'm still discovering. You've made me want to be worthy of you, to be the kind of man and the kind of duke who deserves your love. I know I don't deserve you, but I'm asking anyway. Will you marry me? Will you be my duchess, my partner, my wife? Tears streamed down Ilara's face, but she was smiling. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Ashford surged to his feet and kissed her, pouring every ounce of love and gratitude and relief into it. When they finally broke apart, they were both laughing and crying at once. Helena appeared in the doorway, wiping at her own eyes. Finally, I thought you'd never get around to it. I've had the champagne ready for a week. The wedding, 3 months later, was unlike any the kingdom had ever seen. Ashford had wanted a huge state affair in the capital cathedral, but Ilara had other ideas. We'll have 2 ceremonies, she proposed. A small one in Thornfield for the people who matter most, and then a formal one in the capital for your political obligations. So on a crisp winter morning, Duke Ashford Thorne married Ilara Kinsley in Thornfield's small church, surrounded by villagers who'd known her all her life. Old Thomas carved their wedding arch from wood he'd been saving for something special. Marta the baker made a simple but delicious cake. Children scattered winter flowers. It was perfect. The capital ceremony a week later was grand and formal, attended by the king himself and every major noble in the realm. Ilara wore a dress that cost a fortune and made her look like a princess from a fairy tale. But Ashford knew the truth. She'd been just as beautiful in the simple dress she'd worn in Thornfield, with snow in her hair and joy in her eyes. Cordelia attended with her father, her face a mask of composure that didn't quite hide her bitterness. But she behaved herself, aware that any scene would only damage her own reputation further. As Ashford and Ilara danced at the reception, he pulled her close and whispered, "Any regrets?" "Only that it took you so long to be honest with me," Ilara teased. "We could have saved ourselves a lot of heartache." "True, but would we appreciate this as much if it had been easy?" Ilara considered this, then smiled. "No, probably not, though I could have done without the public hearing and Cordelia's attempts to destroy my reputation." "Fair point," Ashford kissed her forehead. "I promise the rest of our lives will be much less dramatic." He was wrong about that, of course. Life as the Duchess of Silvercrest was never simple. Ilara faced resistance from traditional nobles who thought she was unsuitable. She navigated complex political situations with less grace than she would have liked. There were days when she missed the simplicity of her cottage in Thornfield, when she felt overwhelmed by the weight of her new responsibilities. But she also transformed the duchy in ways Ashford never could have alone. She established a network of healers across Silvercrest, training them and providing them with resources. She created a fund for villages to petition for improvements directly, bypassing corrupt officials. She turned part of the ducal manor into a school for promising students regardless of their birth. And whenever Ashford faced a difficult decision, he'd ask her opinion, genuinely valuing her perspective. Together, they became the kind of leaders the duchy had needed, powerful but compassionate, strategic but honest. 5 years after their wedding, Ilara stood in the same Thornfield garden where she'd first treated old Thomas, now holding a black-haired daughter on her hip while a second child grew in her belly. Ashford stood beside her, his arm around her waist, watching as the village celebrated the opening of the new school, one of a dozen now built across the duchy. Thomas approached them, moving easier now with a better healer and better medicine. Your Grace," he said, addressing them both with a twinkle in his eye. "Fine day, isn't it?" "The finest," Ilara agreed, bouncing little Catherine, named for Ashford's mother on her hip. After Thomas moved on, Ashford turned to his wife, his grey eyes soft with love. "Do you remember that first day, when I knocked on your door pretending to be a merchant? I remember thinking you had the hands of someone who'd never worked a day in his life," Ilara said with a laugh. "I should have known then you were trouble. But you helped me anyway." "I help everyone, it's kind of my thing." She leaned into him, comfortable and content. "Though I'll admit you've turned out to be my most complicated patient." "Patient? You were sick when we met, sick with loneliness and fear and walls around your heart. I just applied the right treatment." She smiled up at him. "Lots of honesty, a dose of trust, and regular applications of love." Ashford laughed and kissed her, not caring who saw. "Best treatment I ever received." As the sun set over Thornfield, painting the sky in those familiar shades of amber and gold, Ashford reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He'd hidden his identity to test her kindness, never expecting to lose his heart completely. But he had lost it, given it freely to a woman who'd seen through his disguises to the man beneath. A woman who challenged him, changed him, and loved him not despite his flaws but with full awareness of them. He'd been looking for someone real, someone genuine, someone who could see past his title. He'd found all that and so much more. He'd found home,